At this time, with recent developments, this hearing takes on more importance due to recent actions by FRA. I prepared a 5-minute long speech today with a number of issues to address some of the items that I think are important to the people that I represent and also to the American public. But after hearing testimony from the first panel this morning, I've dispensed with those prepared comments on 5 minutes because I believe there are 2 issues that have risen that need extra attention, and I think you deserve a different perspective on those issues. And to begin, I'd like to address FRA and its, apparently to me, abdication of its oversight responsibilities with respect to a number of issues. And I'm going to go back a little bit in history. In 2008, Congress passed the Rail Safety Improvement Act. It was a very large piece of legislation. It had a lot of ramifications, including positive train control and others. Since that time, we're talking over a decade later, there were mandates in that law requiring certain fatigue pilot projects and issues that would address the welfare and working conditions of the nation's railroad workers. FRA has not yet implemented any of those provisions. We have a list, it's contained in my written submission, I'd ask you to review it, showing exactly how FRA has abandoned those conditions which are most important to us who work on the railroad. And I too am a railroad worker. I started out on the railroad doing the work of being both brakeman, conductor, locomotive engineer. I'm now the president of the largest rail labor union in North America. I know about this business, I know what I'm talking about, and FRA's decision to abandon the railroad workers and the safety of the American public is devastating to me personally and to the people that I represent. In addition to the 2008 RSIA mandates that were never implemented, we have a number of other issues. One is the Mexican issue with crews coming across the border into our country that my colleague, Mr. Pierce, has already referenced. I'd like to comment on that in a brief fashion, and that is, despite what you heard this morning, despite what you will hear from any industry representative, those crews are not certified to the American standard. The oversight that goes to certification of conductors and locomotive engineers in this country cannot be extended to those people. What we have done here is the FRA has accepted industry comments that don't worry about it. We're doing the same thing there that we do here. FRA has no opportunity for oversight. They can only take the word of the railroads, and the railroads have proved historically that they cannot self-regulate in the safety arena without oversight from the federal government. And I encourage all of you, all of Congress, to take a look at that very important issue. Beyond that, one of the most important things that we're talking about today is the 2-person crew. May 23rd, this FRA went back on all of the information, all of the studies, and all of the work of the prior administration and rescinded its notice of proposed rulemaking. Rescinded the notice that was going to guarantee a certain minimum level of staffing for trains carrying hazardous materials 3 miles long, technology not yet in place to diminish or displace any of the crew staffing people that are already there. And we've heard something about collective bargaining, that it should be left to the Railway Labor Act. We're good at negotiating under the Railway Labor Act. We know how to do that. However, minimum safety standards cannot be negotiated to the degree that it needs to be overseen by the regulatory agency tasked with safety on the nation's rail industry. We cannot replace it with collective bargaining. The conditions of the financial considerations contained in collective bargaining, the avenue for coming to a conclusion should the parties disagree, none of that lends itself to a satisfactory conclusion of rail safety. It does not belong in the collective bargaining arena. Going beyond that, I want to talk for a brief moment about precision railroading. It is exactly what we've heard already today. It has nothing to do with precision anything. What it is hedge fund investors moving into an industry that was well operated, well funded, and well maintained, and harvesting money that should be going to future operations, capital improvements, investing in the industry, and putting it into this month's bottom line, lowering their operating ratios by reducing staffing and operations to the point that customer service is impacted, railroad worker safety is impacted. We now are doing more with less. We take a 3-mile-long train, we put 2 people on there, task saturated with all that they have to do in moving that train from point A to point B. And in addition to that, we reduce staffing levels to the point that those people have to come to work whether they're sick, whether they're fatigued, whether they're tired. It doesn't matter. The requirements are there that should they violate some recently enacted availability policy on all of the major railroads, they run afoul of the rules, they get disciplined, they get charged, and they end up coming to work when they're tired, when they should be home resting, either resting from work or recovering from illness. Instead, they're forced to go to work, and they don't even know when that call is going to come. We've asked the industry time and again to modify their operations to give us a 10-hour call. They refuse to do so. We propose that Congress take a look at the hours of service, make certain modifications. Right now, we get 10 hours off after we get off work. That's good. We need 10 hours notice before we go to work. There's no way you can be rested at 3 o'clock in the morning if you don't know whether you're going at 11 p.m. or 7 a.m. You have to know advance notice when you're going to work. That doesn't occur in the industry today, with very little exception, and I think it's a subject worthy of Congress's attention. I think I may have exceeded my time. Thank you very much again, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you. The Safe Freight Act is very important. It's been it's been in progress for quite some time now. It stagnates. Things have worked against. People have worked against it. Things have worked against it. But now we had what I believe is a watershed moment with the May 23rd directive from FRA, which not only withdrew their notice of proposed rulemaking, it also did a couple of other things that have just as much significance. To begin, we've already heard some that it's an attempt to preempt state laws where the states have stepped in and believe that they should regulate at a higher level than no regulation at all. And by not regulating, FRA has declared that that means that no regulation is either needed or permitted at the state level. Congress needs to take a look at that. In addition, another very serious communication that was buried in that May 23rd notice was the decision to not oversee artificial intelligence or autonomous operations. Every mode of transportation in the country has oversight over the development and implementation of these systems because they're so safety critical. Anyone with reasonable sense can see that trains with hazardous materials moving down the track with reduced crews, with some software version of artificial intelligence similar to the Boeing 737 MAX, needs oversight. It needs oversight in the development, the implementation, and ongoing modifications inherent in moving to more automation. And more automation means more task saturation for the people on the train. It's one thing to drive a train the way that all of us have driven them for a number of years. Now the systems are becoming so complex, the interaction required for positive train control, for example, did not ease the burden on the operating crew, it increased the burden on the operating crew. Congress, I would like to see step in and address simply those issues. There are other issues, and you can read them in my written submission, but those issues, as a result of the May 23rd notice to withdraw the rulemaking, all need to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed timely. Letting the Safe Freight Act sit while there was a rulemaking in place is one thing. Withdrawing the rulemaking emphasizes the importance of moving forward on these issues by Congress because FRA has exhibited they're not going to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Bohl.
Question for you, Mr. Previsich. In your testimony, you noted that positive train control for all of its benefits cannot cut a road crossing, spot a terrorist, back up a train, make an air test, nor can it secure a train. And I think you hit there on something very important, not just with respect to what we're discussing here in the railroad industry, but one of the fundamental issues that we're going to be facing as a country, as an economy in the years ahead, and it's a complicated one. To what extent do we allow machines to replace people? And I hope we can agree that just because something can be automated doesn't mean that it should be. Some cases we should go there, some cases maybe not. So I wanted to ask you if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that theme, on the importance of having human beings on board a train to do what technology either cannot do or should not do.
Yes, thank you, and I do concur with your comments on maybe we should, as society, take a look at, is it desirable? Just because we can, does that mean we want to? And I'll use autonomous operations as an example. For years now, we've been working on autonomous cars. They're always going to be here next year. You're going to see them driving around on the roads. That was 3, 4, 5 years ago that we first started hearing about that. It is not yet implemented today. That autonomous automobile cannot tell the difference between the box on the side of the road or a baby on the side of the road. And with respect to train operations, there's a feel for operating a train that comes from years of experience that can't be duplicated, even though there may be technology that comes to the forefront that will start a train at point A, take it down the track and stop at point B. That's good, but there are a lot of things that happen during that trip, the intervening time between point A and point B. A well-rested operating crew is observing thousands of things. They're handling multitudes of tasks, obligations, and in addition to that, no one has ever successfully explained to me how a train blocking a crossing with the ambulance on one side and the hospital on the other can be either cut itself in two so that the ambulance can get through, or even with one person, how they manage to do that. Just because technology may permit something to happen doesn't mean that we as society need for it to happen.
Thank you. You heard my question to Mr. Batory about the 3-mile train and how long it would take a single operator to walk all the way back. What did you think of his answer, that if he's a good walker, maybe in 2 hours he could go back and forth and that's just fine? Is that fine?
It's even more complicated than that. It may take 2 hours to walk from one end to the other, but that doesn't account for whatever reason is evident for you making that walk. It doesn't account for doing it in Minnesota in the wintertime, in Arizona in the summertime. It doesn't account for the fact that maybe some work needs to be done partway down the train, if not at the very end of the train. And that work being, let's cut the crossing, for example. Well, one person can't do that. The engineer is up on the head of the train waiting to take direction from his team member, the conductor, who's actually on site doing the work at the location in the train that it needs to be done. It's unreasonable and unworkable to suggest that we're not going to block crossings, that breakdowns and occurrences are never going to happen, and that if they do, either one person or autonomy can handle the situation out there. Operating a train 3 miles long through communities with hazardous materials is a big deal. Yesterday we saw a derailment in Nevada. Someone had the idea that maybe they should put a munitions train onto a regular train that had hazardous materials in it and put empties in the middle. Now, if you know anything about railroading, you don't do that. They did that. It's something that, again, the demands of operating a 2-mile long train, 3-mile long train is ridiculous, but 2-mile long train or less, those demands require 2 people on the crew. And I've been doing this for a long time. I can testify in front of any forum that it's essential that we do crews that can adequately operate the train in a safe manner, that the employees are not at risk, and that the public is not at risk.
Thank you.
Have you all been bargaining collectively about technology with some satisfaction, so that you believe that this will happen in conjunction with how the workers understand why it's happening, and without simply offloading of workers for technology. Yes, sir.
We have a history of bargaining with respect to technological improvements and have gone along with industry movements for 40 years, 50 years now, as things get better from going steam locomotive to diesel locomotive, things such as that. We're with you, we're not Luddites, we get it. The challenge is that along the way, we don't want safety to be compromised by lack of regulatory oversight. There's a minimum standard that needs to be maintained. The industry in and of itself cannot be relied upon to do that. There needs to be some regulatory oversight and responsibility to help us get to the right place. We can't do it on our own.
Well, it's the best argument I've ever heard for collective bargaining, that if in fact workers sit down with industry and engage in collective bargaining, that I will feel that we are not the last chance for safety, that the last chance is, as always, relies with fruitful collective bargaining. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.